RSET type training in addition to the workshop itself. But we'd be very interested in hearing how they would like us, how they think we can productively collaborate on that.
Okay, and I'm giving them copies right now of the draft so far, so they
Great.
can come up to speed on it.
Yeah, it's in the current language.
And again, they're planning on submitting this about October timeframe, or at least for the start of the new FY. Yeah,
we were actually hoping to get it in September if we can.
Okay.
Would it be better? Would it be better after October 1?
No, it'll be October 1 funds anyways. It'll be new FY funds. So I suggest, whenever you get it in, just have that stipulation. And okay. I already gave a heads up to the Director of Applied Sciences, Lawrence Friedel, that this would be coming. So we'll see how long that stays in his memory banks. But but at least he's got a heads up, and he said, "Great, sounds good." We're looking forward to seeing it. So
great. One of our questions, Vince, is whether we have to ask for support from 2 programs, because with indirect costs from the university, I'm not sure if we'll be over or under, or a little over that 50,000 threshold. So I thought about maybe trying to, see if we get support from the carbon cycle program as well on this. But I don't know.
Yeah. I don't know how they would handle that, but I think that's an intelligent way to go, and I think headquarters likes to see that cost sharing. Nobody ever wants to see everything come out of their individual budgets. They're always going down the halls looking for other people, so I think that's appropriate. And I also I remembered that you talked to, or our last conversation, Mike Flanagan was on, and there was some talk about possible participation from the Canadian side, or financial input from the Canadian side. Is that still?
That's unfortunately not, still pending. Tim Lynham sent an email saying that he had asked the source that he had identified, and that they said no. He said he had another fallback, but he was not optimistic about that.
Okay. I just remember
that conversation. We are in the process of putting in when the proposal's finished, we'll put in also a request for support to IASC, the International Arctic Science Committee, and they have a couple of working groups that are relevant to the proposal, and they've expressed some interest. They would only come up with probably about $5K to help with young investigators from outside the U.S., but that would be a very appropriate help in association with Arctic Science Summit Week. So that's a little help anyway.
Okay. All right, I'm gonna go back on mute. I'm gonna go grab that document off the printer so I give it to our colleagues here.
Great. Vince,
is that Cynthia with you then? Is Cynthia on the call?
No, go ahead.
No, this is Amber Cuss. I work directly under Cynthia, so she's just in another meeting right now, but our plan is to sort of review what you guys have and see where we can align our efforts and let you know. But she is definitely in this conversation, she's just not in the room right now.
Oh, great. Thanks. Thanks, Amber.
Amber, could you say your last name again so I can include it on the roll?
Yeah, it's Cuss, K-U-S-S.
Okay, and I guess I should mention, if anybody else is on the call or sharing phones, please let me know so I can include you on our roll. Thanks.
Hey, Randy, this is Rachel on the proposal. I haven't done anything since I reviewed it last, but we talk about asking for any contributed funds from USGS Alaska Science Center or the regional office here.
We have not even thought of that, Rachel.
I think if it sounds like something that we could use, maybe we could pursue that. I know that Carl Marcon is already aware that this is happening, and so he sent me some emails asking questions, and even if it's just a little bit of sort of infrastructure support or whatever, it might be a thing we could do.
Yeah, that would be terrific. I mean, certainly we'd like to have a good participation from the cadre of USGS scientists that are working in this area. So even that kind of support in travel for participating would be something we could include in the proposal that, you know, USGS is planning to sponsor that.
Okay. Well, I'll follow up with Mark Shasby from the center, and then also with Carl, and see what we might be able to put together.
That's great, Rachel. Thank you.
Yeah.
Jessica, do you mind scrolling through that proposal a little bit? You know, maybe page through it, just sort of flash by. It's only 10 pages at this point, so people can kind of see. And the last page is the budget, I think. So, or maybe second to the last page. These proposals, FYI, are supposed to be pretty short for the topical workshops, and like 12 pages. So it's not as involved as a full research project proposal that some of you guys are used to. A little bit more pared down. So the part that's been most difficult so far is working on for Allison and I, is working on the NASA, how it fits into their science plan and that kind of thing. And there you can see the budget. The largest portion of the budget would be sponsorships for invited speakers, and then young investigators award there. We'd like to make sure we get some of the young scientists that may not have funds like to travel to participate in this. I'll take any more comments, and then I guess we'll move on to item 2.
Okay, so this is my turn to speak up, even though it sounds like Allison already covered it pretty quickly. Yeah, we turned out what's that?
I just said, please do, Kent.
Yeah, so the process to get a student turned, even with UAF already being pre-qualified, I can't remember the program, turns out we still had to put it out on grants.gov for 90 days, I think. So UAF has submitted their proposal. I'm not aware of any other proposals for that at this stage. It should be closing here fairly quickly, and then we should be able to award and actually move money to get this process going so we could meet that, show that we're still working toward that milestone.
And is it correct that Todd Brinkman has identified the intern that would be working on this?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. It's a student named Alyssa Rodriguez, one of the RAP students.
Great.
Related to this topic, this is Rachel again. I got BIA funding to do a climate change indigenous community project on the Yukon Delta, but as a result of that, I have some people who've been sending me emails from the BIA on climate change, fire, and indigenous people topics in Alaska. There's this woman named Margaret Herzog who is in the BIA, and she's producing these case studies or stories about fire and indigenous people in Alaska, among other places. It's part of some kind of toolkit that the BIA is rolling out. So it seems like, I don't know if BIA could kick in, support, or coordinate or something like that, but it would be good for them to have a more local perspective on what's going on than they are producing so far.
And what was her name again?
Margaret Herzog, and I have a slew of emails and a website and all kinds of stuff that give background on this idea.
Okay.
So,
yeah, I've got some BIA fire people we'll be meeting with in soon as this call's done. So I'll ask them about that.
Okay. Yeah, and BIA did so they just had this RFP and funded some projects in Alaska, and I could get you that list as well, but there may be one in the interior, specifically on fire and fire adaptation. I'm not sure.
Okay.
Rachel, this is Jessica Rohde. I think I'd like to get in touch with Margaret and invite her to the IRPIC website. Hopefully she could post some information on the website about this project.
Okay. Is there anybody here who knows her personally on this call? So I can, if there isn't, I'll just say that she is a little difficult. It's been a little difficult to coordinate and figure out what's actually going on. So I can also send you all the background I have, but anyway.
Yeah, I'll try. We like to have the person who knows the most about a project post about it, but if she's not going to be able to do it, I'll ask you or somebody who knows her to post. That would be great.
Yeah, no, I'm sure she would. I don't want to post anything for her. It's just been a little hard for me to disentangle what's actually happening from her email, so it would be good to go to the source.
Kent, has BIA selected a new FMO yet to replace Ray Hart?
We believe so, but I haven't seen anything official.
I wonder if that would be a good conduit for us to go through once they do.
That may well be, but I'll be meeting with that person's supervisor here shortly, so I'll chat with them about this.
Cool, thanks. Well, I guess we're ready for you, Rachel. I'd like to introduce Rachel Loehman from the USGS Science Center in Alaska. A lot of you folks are already familiar with her. She has been in Alaska about a year now, and prior to that did a lot of really good work on emissions and their impacts on society and a lot of other carbon science-related work out of the Western U.S., out of Missoula, right, Rachel?
Yeah, the Missoula Fire Lab.
Yeah. And so she's, Jessica, I think, is trying to bring up the slides, right?
Yeah, sorry, just a second.
That's okay. So I really appreciate Rachel being with us as a subject matter expert to sort of lead this discussion on the impact of wildfire emissions in the northern climates, and I appreciate the other folks from the management side and the science side being on to sort of, I hope we can have a good discussion about this along with the presentation. So, looks like the slides are coming up.
Yeah, is that working? Can you see my desktop?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. So hopefully this can be kind of an informal discussion rather than a half hour or whatever of me talking. So please, anyone out there, interject with an audio comment or question or discussion point whenever you have one. But otherwise, I'll just go through these slides. So I think this talk or this presentation to you all is part of a discussion that Randy and I have been having about carbon emissions from different kinds of wildfire in Alaska, and then my understanding of Alaskan fire has really benefited from some work that I've done with Lisa Saperstein, who's on this call, and then Jennifer Barnes. So I want to thank all of the three of you for really giving me a great hands-on chance to see fire ecology in Alaska so far. So the central question for this presentation that Randy came up with is this question. So how can I measure how much CO2 is released by tundra fires in Alaska? the background on this, is, as I understand it, is this is a kind of a question that managers would pose to those of us in the fire science or fire management community. So there's a lot of attention that's focused on fire emissions now. In places like California, there are websites where you can do a little emissions calculator and see pretty handily that, you know, the annual emissions from wildfire have, you know, equal some proportion of industrial emissions or transportation emissions or whatever. And so that's an attempt to put wildfire emissions in context or perspective, suggest some maybe feedbacks to the global climate cycle. And then, you know, there's a factor of the regulatory factor. So is one of the reasons for managing wildfires to change the amount of carbon that's emitted. So all those things are kind of big political topics and management topics, and you know, I have tried to look at those topics from kind of the fire ecology perspective to figure out what carbon cycling and fire is actually all about. So hopefully we'll talk a little bit about that today. And I've included some comment from Dave McGuire on the white paper that Randy and I are working on, and the draft form of that is on the website. So his comment is that we need more information on basically fuel consumption and how it varies over space and time. And there have been some papers that have looked at the spatial variability in fuel consumption, but not necessarily how that translates to what happens in repeat fires or through various years where you have different kinds of climate drivers of fire. And then the kind of the bandwagon I've been on with carbon dynamics for a while is this idea of differentiating between carbon storage, which I like to think of as money in the bank, and carbon sequestration, which is kind of like the interest on your money in the bank. So it's a process rather than an amount. And sometimes those two kinds of terms, storage versus sequestration, are used interchangeably, but in the ecological world, they're really different, and so how we evaluate them can't be exactly in the same terms. So I think, in general, not to give away the punchline of this talk, but evaluating a loss of carbon from wildfire or an amount of carbon emitted from wildfire is, if we saw a big pulse of carbon to the atmosphere from a fire, that's potentially less concerning from an ecological or climate feedback perspective than if we saw a big shift in the amount of sequestration possible on some footprint of ground. So I'll talk more about that later. Are there any questions or comments so far? Okay, so a lot of what I'm going to talk about is from a review paper that I did with some others a couple years ago. And so just to dive more into the idea about storage versus sequestration. Storage, again, is like, I think of it like money in the bank. It's biomass on the ground or under the ground in the canopy. And so it's really how much carbon there is on a chunk of ground at any one time. And the loss of that carbon from wildfire is affected by this list of things: what the fire weather is like, so how something like relative humidity would affect, and temperature would affect fuel moistures, which would affect the amount of consumption, what the winds were like, which would drive flame length, which would potentially affect the surface to crown fire behavior, what the extent of a particular fire is, what its severity is in terms of consumption, and then what the pre-fire site conditions and productivity were, how much biomass there was on the ground or under the ground storing carbon, and how that biomass burned. And then in terms of carbon sequestration, some of the same things are important, but the ways that we measure them are different. So you want to think about sequestration as a rate process. We need to integrate time and space and think about not just the fire that occurred at any one particular year, but what the frequency of fire is on a landscape. So how often fire is releasing carbon to the atmosphere or changing fuels, what the severity of fires is in general, how large fires are in general, and over time, what kind of area burned we're talking about. And then the climatic space or the climate window in which those fires burn, the productivity in general of the landscape that depends on things like topography and soils and hydrologic pattern, and then the kinds of vegetation that all of those things support, and then what happens to that vegetation over time after a fire, all figure into the calculation of carbon sequestration as a process. And then, of course, if we have big shifts in drivers, like changes in climate that alter fire regimes, we can see changes in community composition or structure, shift to new types of vegetation, and that can affect the amount of carbon that can be sequestered on a piece of ground. So the two are really different. So when we talk about carbon emissions from a particular wildfire, that's on the top half of that graph. That's a change in the storage. And if we can regain some of that carbon, or all of that carbon, or more than the initial amount of carbon through this rate sequestration process, that's fine, and the net balance tends to be zero on most landscapes unless the type of perturbation, the type of fire, fire combined with some other disturbance is altered beyond kind of the historical range of variability. So I said I wasn't going to lecture, and now I've just given a big lecture. So if anybody has a comment to break up my lecture, please jump in. Anyone?
I think that's a great summary of the scientific, sort of an outline of the issues. That's a great place to start.
Okay. Good. Yeah. So, so Randy, that is a good reminder to kind of segue or swing toward the management side of the discussion. So I guess if somebody, going back to that initial question, what does this fire do for my carbon balance? I guess the questions I would want to, or the answers I would want to provide to a manager in order to be able to really evaluate the significance of the fire in terms of its emissions are, does that particular fire deviate from the expected severity, extent, area burned? Do we have reason to think that what will come back after the fire, the vegetation community, will that community differ from what was there before? Is the rate of recovery, or the time it takes that community to come back, significantly different? And if there is a delay in the recovery, or if there is a switch to a new kind of vegetation, does that change the long-term carbon sequestration picture? So in the lower 48, all those things are happening. So ponderosa pine forests, where I've worked in the Southwest, are a perfect example. There's a huge fuel loading issue that's resulted, along with higher temperatures and lower humidities, in more severe fire consuming more fuel, and also burning off larger extents of canopy than we know happened in the past from really detailed fire history. And what's coming back are not trees in some cases. There are large areas where the fire burned off a lot of the soil organics, there's no seed source, and you have a transition from a forested landscape to a grassland, which stores, potentially less carbon in any given year, and that changes the grassland, changes the fire regime, so you get these shorter fire intervals, and so the forest is essentially eliminated from, some extent within that fire perimeter, and so that's a real concern. So, we have some ideas that things like that can happen in Alaska, particularly if we start seeing, more temperature and water limitations or stresses on tree growth, along with things like permafrost degradation that are changing the, hydrologic and temperature picture of the places where forests grow. And then on the tundra, we have differences in the moisture of the tundra plants that are changing the depth of the burns, and in some places maybe altering the communities that come back. So that's where I would say individual fires can become a significant management concern in terms of changing the carbon balance of the landscape. So I just have some examples, and I don't want to go through these in too much detail, but I'm sure you all know about this, the Anaktuvuk River fire. It's been studied a lot. And basically, the image on the right is the MTBF monitoring trends and burn severity, maps severity within the fire perimeter. So red is high severity, and this fire was fairly unprecedented in the long-term record in terms of the amount of area burned, the severity of the fire, and also the change in carbon balance of the landscape. And it's also been linked, that fire event has been linked to the most extreme moisture deficit that's occurred in the past 61 years. So that leads to some models, and this is one of them, that show an increase in the predicted annual area burned in tundra areas as you get more of these warming and drying trends over the area. So, will the Anaktuvuk fire become sort of the new normal, which obviously would change the carbon dynamics of tundra ecosystems. And so each individual fire, if it burned in this new normal context, or increasing area burn and severity, that has implications for really changing the carbon balance of the landscape as a whole, with all the feedbacks to global climate that we're worried about.
So, Rachel, can you discuss that figure just a little bit more? So, it looks like as the temperature increases 1 degree Celsius, it's not an even rate of change. There's like a tipping point between around 10 degrees Celsius average summer temperature, where you really get an increase in area burned. And then the precipitation scale axis, I'm not exactly sure what's happening there.
Yeah, so that's, there's a pretty good description of what that is in this paper. So basically, there's a nonlinear relationship between temperature and annual area burn. That's exactly what you said. So as you get to those higher seasonal temperatures, so June, July, August, September, you get this big jump up in the prediction for annual area burn. So that's true. It's a nonlinear effect. And then precipitation had a less strong influence on annual area burn. It was still kept in this model, but the issue that you talked about is a result of the fact that precipitation wasn't that strong a driver. And the reason that was given in this paper is that precipitation is so localized and has such local effects on fire, whereas temperature tends to be sort of occupy a more broad footprint in space in terms of, if you've got these higher seasonal temperatures, they're occurring across a larger area, whereas, precipitation amounts for the season can reflect really localized patterns having to do with, topography or, distance from a coast or something like that. So yeah, that's a good observation. So what you could take from this, and it's kind of good news for fire modelers, is that if you wanted to pick one predictor for annual area burned, you could probably use temperature, which is good because it's an easier, number to get.
So can you hear me? It's Nancy French.
Yeah.
Oh, great. I'm on my phone and I wasn't sure how this was working. I just think we need to make sure, so I'll be devil's advocate, I guess, is what I'm thinking, because when you talk about carbon cycling and the impacts on fire, when you don't have a lot of carbon, it becomes less of a question. In other words, a lot of the work that's been done on carbon cycling is in forested sites and we know, especially in the deep organics of the Boreal and other peatland types, you can lose a lot of carbon, and you can also do that if you have a large forest with a complex understory. We're talking about a system, though, that has carbon held in the ground layer on, you know, the organic soil, but it's, for one thing, we don't really know what the distribution of what's being held is there. There has been not a whole lot of survey work done to do that well. And then secondly, even then, what's affected by fire has been, in most cases, been a fairly moderate amount of stuff that actually burns. So I guess the devil's advocate thing is, do we really care about the carbon loss in fire compared to what in other areas where it's really much more important?
You're talking about carbon loss in tundra wildfires as compared with
wildfires, yeah.
Yeah.
And so I guess one of the emphasis I want to make is that we really do need a lot more measurements of organic soil depths and carbon, you know, pools in Arctic pipes, I think. Even though we have some good data out there, it's pretty sparse when you compare it to other parts of the world.
No, I think that's absolutely true, and I think it's this group has already, I think, pointed that out in a couple different tables and white papers. And the Anaktuvuk fire, to go back to it, is, you know, it's probably one of the better studied fires with regard to you know, changes in carbon from the fire, and so those results have been applied, you know, kind of conceptually to wildfires and tundra ecosystems in general. But if you look at this slide, I went back to this report that Randy headed up. I mean, I think that's the goal now of these longer-term monitoring studies, is to really get kind of a carbon life cycle associated with these fire events. But I bet, and maybe Lisa, you could weigh in, that there's not a general consensus in the Alaska fire community that the loss of carbon from tundra ecosystems is negligible. Now you have to answer, Lisa.
No, I was hitting the mute thing. I don't think people think it's negligible, and then the ongoing effects that happen after the immediate loss. I mean, it's even been getting a lot of press in the newspapers this summer about effects on permafrost and potential post-fire effects that could keep feeding back.
So I guess that's my question.
We need more data, for sure.
In general, people are, I guess, do you get very much pushback like I'm saying, that why do we really care about carbon? It's such a small amount. I certainly am on your side. I'm definitely being devil's advocate. I think we need to understand the carbon cycle and impacts from fire. But I think there's got to be a decent number of people out there wondering why we should spend effort on it. All
yeah, Nancy. Yeah, Nancy, I agree. This is Randy, and I want to kind of summarize this issue and then let Rachel move on so she has time to finish her slides. But I would capture this issue as to, there's a question, how significant is the carbon loss from tundra fires now in the Arctic, and how significant will it become under predicted climate warming? And your question is actually the same one, sort of in different words, different framework, that the state of Alaska forester, Chris Maish, posed to me at the Spring Science Workshop in Alaska, and he said, what if I want to know how much carbon really is being released on tundra fires? How do I know? We've done a lot of research in different aspects of what Rachel discussed on that summary slide. How close are we to being able to answer a basic question like that? And it seems like there's this gap between the science and applying it. So anyway, I captured that question, and it's a good one. Let's put that in the notes.
Yeah, and Nancy, I want to join you in being devil's advocate now in my very own slides. And I think another question that we can ask is whether, say, transfer of carbon from, carbon stored in biomass to the atmosphere is really the most significant kind of thing to worry about with fire. And I think often it actually is not. I think I didn't put it in this talk, but in a different talk or talks, I guess I used to say that we need a way, if carbon is going to be our currency of interest in fire ecology because of pressure from, say, policymakers, we need a way to translate ecological resources or values at risk or whatever you want to call them into carbon units. Because, I think it's really easy to kind of get sucked into this idea that carbon is the main game when it comes to thinking about what, fire effects are, because there's this big policy-driven push to do it. But maybe with Tundra fire, although, there's decades-old or, century-old carbon that's being released to the atmosphere, I think it's quite likely that ecologically that's not the most significant effect of increasingly severe fire, and that we have, bigger things to think about, but, those can come about with the same kinds of research that it would take to evaluate carbon loss. So yeah, that
sounds good. I agree. That's with you on the ecology. Yep.
Yeah, good. Well, yeah. So I don't know. I think this Anaktuvuk River fire study is really it's kind of standing in for a lot of other monitoring and inventory work that we need to do. So if anybody on this call wants to do some work next year in the Aniak fire, let me know, because I have the idea that might be the next one that we could look at. Okay, so there's the title of this talk includes boreal forests, even though they're kind of a better studied system. So I just threw in a couple of slides, and really the significance of this one is just that we have these via charcoal record, what seems to be a fairly unprecedented in terms of Holocene fire history amount of burning in boreal forests. So it's kind of a general increase in fire activity. And then getting back to the idea of fire emissions or of wildfire effects influencing not just carbon at the time of stored at the time of fire, but also having this potential to change the sequestration. This is a figure from a really good paper by Jill Johnston, and just showing that you could have these kinds of separate trajectories of succession, like A, B, and C, different forest types, but that are maintained basically by different fire regimes. But the dashed arrows show that with different kinds of fire that are outside the typical fire regimes of those forests, you can switch basically to different forest types, and that would change the ecology and therefore the carbon dynamics of that particular landscape. So again, if we want to think about climate effects, we want to think not just about what's happening at the time of the fire, but also what's happening, years or decades afterwards. And then this is a figure that I've been playing around with for a while, because resilience is such a big buzzword, but I think we can use it to think about, Alaska and ecosystems and carbon as well. It's just kind of an illustration of resistance versus resilience themes that are pretty popular ones to talk about now. So the top one is high resistance, high resilience. So basically, if we have a system that, because of its inherent, fuel properties or climate space or topographic setting, resists change, and it may also have a high resilience, which means that if there is a perturbation, that particular system doesn't really change in character. That would be this top figure. So that could be a disturbance-prone landscape that, over, say, centuries of time, this kind of has this internal variability, but, within this consistent envelope for whatever you're looking at, carbon or, you know, some population of something or whatever. And then what we worry about with increased stress from, say, warming and drying, from climate changes or another type of disturbance is changes in that kind of envelope. And so you could have a system that has high resistance, but low resilience. So maybe that's, you know, something similar to a tundra system where, you know, normally fuel moistures are high, ignitions are relatively limited, and so you get a system that fluctuates but doesn't change in character until you get a disturbance, you know, fire that happens at a really hot and dry time that, you know, pushes that system into a new state. So maybe one where you don't get the same vegetation community back, or it takes a really long time for that system to recover. So that would be high resistance, low resilience. And then the worst possible case is the bottom one, where, you know, you have a system that's really sensitive to change, and when you get a perturbation, it just absolutely changes character and doesn't return. So I think it's really helpful to think about our different ecosystems and where they would fit in this picture, and what, you know, what amount of change, which is an ongoing topic of research, what kind of perturbation it would take to push them into this new state. So I guess here's probably the take-home message, and we should have started here, but this is just my brainstorming, along with ideas from Randy and Lisa and Jennifer and other people I've talked to about where we could go in terms of connecting research with management needs, and what we can do to tackle this problem of climate change and fires and carbon and other kinds of ecological topics of concern. So I just went back to the storage and sequestration ideas and made some suggestions there in the red for ways that we could assess these particular aspects. So I can just read through them, but fire extent and severity, you know, there's been work done with remote sensing. More is good, validation is very good. And then notions of what severity means in, you know, tundra and boreal forest systems as compared to, you know, other places in the lower 48 is, I think, something that we could work on. In terms of knowing what sites were like before the fire, which helps us assess how they change, obviously more inventory and monitoring is good, or is necessary, I would say. And then for how fires burn on the landscape once they start, we need things like a better handle on emissions factors. So what, you know, kind of and this is what we were talking about just a few minutes ago. So what actually happens when fires burn in terms of emissions from biomass to the atmosphere, and what are the types of fire, the behaviors of fire, flame length, rate of spread, intensities that result in different kinds of combustion, amounts of emissions. And then what happens afterward in terms of, you know, secondary losses of carbon directly after the fire. So all of those things require, you know, monitoring and perhaps experimental studies in laboratories. And I don't think we have enough of those projects going now. And then in terms of sequestration, more of the ecological side than just individual fires, you know, an important question is how any particular fire deviates from that kind of envelope of variability that I showed in that last slide. So how does, you know, what is the fire history of a particular biome type, say, or place? What are the statistical fire-climate relationships? So what can we expect in terms of new fire behaviors or fire regimes with changing climate? And can we model those? And then in terms of climate effects on site productivity, that's a place for both monitoring and modeling to come together and provide some new insights on what the long-term effects of climate changes are on particular ecosystems. Which speaks to the next bullet point too, looking at potential changes in successional trajectories, what the recovery time is post-fire, and then how fires, you know, change species structure, composition, functional types, habitat, et cetera. And for that, we need really long-term monitoring and potentially modeling as well. And all of that can feed into this last bullet point, which is developing a mechanistic, not a state and transition model, but a mechanistic climate, vegetation, and fire model that can potentially incorporate fire behavior and also climate drivers. And I think one more slide. I'm going to stop here for some discussion before going on to the last slide.
So, Rachel, this is Anupma Prakash from University of Alaska Fairbanks. This is really intriguing, your research work. There are a couple of minutes left. I just wanted to let you know that Chris Weigel over here, who is online also, is in an advanced stage of a PhD looking at remote sensing for wildfires in Alaska. And some of her work is very complementary to what you've presented and can add a lot of value to this group's discussion. We partner with NASA, especially with the NASA hyperspectral team over there, the History Science team, on which I serve as a science member. And we also work with Charles Ichoku over there looking at MODIS data products for fire mapping. So perhaps what I could do is that, just in the interest of time, put together, Chris and I can put together a one-pager and post it to this IRPIC community in our group to just summarize the kind of work she's done. And also one resource that we bring is new airborne facilities in the state of Alaska for fire mapping, because we've just received, we've commissioned a hyperspectral instrument for fire mapping, which goes into the shortwave infrared, and we can fly this sensor over fire sites during and post-burn season 2. So maybe I'll write two separate, just one-pages for this community and post it on the website so that people can just go through it, and those who are interested can then interact with us, and maybe we'll find opportunities to collaborate on these topics if this is of mutual interest to the group.
Yeah, from my perspective, that would be fantastic. You know, any kind of new data sets, and then, you know, people interested in this topic that we can bring to bear on this idea of, you know, what's happening within particular fires, and then what the long-term patterns of vegetation change and, you know, and potentially carbon cycling are. I think that's great. That's what we need to do.
Hello. This is Chris Weigel, just saying hello, and thanks for this is my first time on this meeting, being invited, and thank you for Anupma for bringing up my name. And indeed, I just want to say I'm very, very interested in finding a way of linking up what I've been building up with what this group is doing, and the presentation, I mean, exactly hits what I think is the background of that. The one hope that I have, and as I'm saying, I mean, I've only been working on fire for 2 years, or you've been working on it much longer, is that with newer remote sensing methods, we might get a better handle on the severity question, which I understand people have. Well, I don't think there is yet an agreement about what fire severity should be in the context of impact on carbon cycling. Or if there is, we don't yet have a good handle about how to quantify it.
Yeah, so I think that's a good way to put it. Severity, you know, in its kind of truest definition of the word in fire ecology, is really, it's really subjective. So there's this kind of broad application of the severe fire term in the lower 48 means fires that basically burn off canopy. I mean, if you ask most people in the lower 48 what a severe fire looks like, they would say it's a stand replacing fire. Up here, that definition doesn't work in the boreal forest. And so there's two questions. One, how do we want to define fire severity for Alaskan ecosystems so that it doesn't just de facto become about the amount of canopy that burns off? And then I guess the other question is, how do we measure Alaska-centric fire severity that may differ from ways that it's done in the lower 48? And I mean, can we do a better, more interesting job? Can we figure out a way to measure severity or relate severity to something like airborne imagery in a way that incorporates not just the instantaneous effect of the fire on, you know, the visible overstory, but also on actual ecological processes. And if we could do that, you know, we would be leading the show for the lower 48 in terms of fire ecology.
Well, I hate to break up this discussion because it's a very, very interesting discussion, but I'm looking at the clock and wondering, Jessica, are time constraints, are we going to be hung if we run over 10 minutes or so?
No, that should be fine, and I'll also point out that you can continue discussions. Just like Untitled said, feel free to post about your work that you want to get connected, and also use our comment feature on the website to continue your questions and your dialogue. But I will have to leave in approximately a half an hour, less than a half an hour. So we could go 10 or 15 more minutes, and if anybody needs to leave, that's fine. This will be recorded, so you can catch up on the rest of the conversation later.
Right. So thanks, Rachel. Was that pretty much, this was going to be your last slide? Are we sort of wrapping up the discussion now?
I have one more slide, but I don't know that it even fits in this discussion. It's a thing that kind of a framework for evaluating a fire vulnerability that is part of a joint fire science proposal that just got funded, and I thought if we had time to talk about how you might evaluate the vulnerability of a particular landscape, we could go through it, but it's pretty obvious if people just want to read it on their own. But it's something that we're going to be, this method of incorporating, you know, exposure sensitivity and adaptive capacity to fire is new for this proposal. So read it and ask questions.
Show us that slide, Rachel.
Okay. Yeah.
So this is a joint fire science proposal, and you said it has been funded in the Southwest?
Yeah, it was part of the FON for last year, so we just got the award.
And your idea, if I understand correctly, is that this type of approach might make a good project for impacts on northern climate as well, a similar type of approach. I
think it would work. So the vulnerability assessment method has been used, you know, in everything from, you know, business to, you know, wildlife to human communities, but it's never been used to evaluate. It's never been used in a fire ecology context. It's never been applied to, you know, climate change and fire. And so that's what we did for this proposal, is come up with this framework for what a vulnerability assessment for fire means, and then in the project itself, through the methods, and I think that proposal is on the JFST website now. You know, we step through basically how we get each one of these pieces, and then how we work with managers to basically go through the last step, which is the treatment step, the implementation, and monitoring for effectiveness. So, but, you know, all of this would work no matter where you are in the world. It's just and so it would be great if we wanted to, if we could do this for, you know, tundra or boreal forest, or even tundra as compared with boreal forest or whatever, it would absolutely work. It's just the examples on the right-hand side are, you know, dry forests from the Southwest, but the logic is the same.
It might be interesting, Rachel, to take this slide and work up, you know, change the wording, the examples, components, and whatnot, and sort of make a little one-page outline for tundra and boreal forest. And I guess that would be 2 pages, one for each.
Yeah.
Just as a way to sort of put what you just talked about together. Do you think that would be a worthwhile exercise, maybe, to take to our next meeting?
If people are interested in that idea, I would absolutely do it. I'm really excited about this because I think it, you know, to implement this framework requires scientists to basically do a really thorough job of understanding the systems to provide background, and then it provides this way to interface with the management community in terms of stepping through this kind of triage of of concern. So and I think it would be great. So yeah, I can do that. I can do the one-pagers if people are interested in, working through them and discussing further.
So if, in the interest of time, if people, let's do a little straw vote here, if people think this might be worthwhile and would be willing to provide some comments in the interval before our next meeting on the sort of one-page type of summary, click on your hand icon there. Let's see how many folks think that would be a good thing to summarize and review this topic.
Okay, so I can't see the hand, but I can tell you that I'd be interested. This is Anupma Prakash from UAF.
Ditto. I don't know where the hand is.
Yeah, no hand.
Should be just above the chat.
Just post it and on the website, and then we can use the comment section, as was suggested.
Okay.
Good idea, yes. Please leave a comment here. I'll show you where to do it. Rachel, I'm going to take away your presenter privileges again.
All right.
But I'll show you where you can leave a comment saying yes, and maybe Randy can start off the discussion by saying leave your comment here.
Yeah, well, and the only piece that might not fit exactly, I might have to change, is the adaptive capacity one, because if they're not likely to be any treatments like, thinning or some particular method of doing fire exclusion, that language doesn't apply here, but adaptive capacity can mean other things so I can try to figure out, and especially with help from people like Randy and Lisa and maybe Jennifer, how that would fit with Alaska, fire management.
I would argue that adaptive capacity is relevant, because I think one of the biggest things that we want to use in Alaska is the flexibility in our fire management plan. Would you agree with that, Kent? So, I mean, that's kind of the whole thing. We want to know if it's worth making changes to the fire management plan based on some of this science.
Yeah, and that's actually from a management standpoint, a very relevant topic, because Department of Interior fire executives will be up here in a week and a half. One of the topics is going to be looking at the interagency fire management plan, and should we change it from an initial response plan to a more fully fleshed out, large-scale management plan, not just how we initially respond to fires. So this would be very useful for informing the discussion that comes up there and what we do from there.
Okay, and so in that case, we could also use this as a test case for this remote sensing idea. So looking at, better imagery or, newer imagery, looking at how fires are changing the landscape, and then especially with and then integrating some of the, observed and modeled work on climate drivers. So I think the remote sensing component has a lot to offer for this.
Yeah, so an example management question might be, is there potential for use of real-time remote sensing tool that might cause to take a different strategy than is prescribed by the fire management plan on some particular incident or some particular region. So that would be an example of how an application. So that was really interesting, and I'm looking for a way to wrap this up since we are a little over time. I guess I have final comments on the topic, and then we'll move on to our announcements in the next meeting.
I found the hand, by the way. It's next to your attendee. If you look at your name, there's a little hand icon near your name. It's not on the top.
Thanks, Lisa.
I think the location of the hand varies depending on your system, but I am showing the comment section, and this is on the event page for this event. So I will actually be posting the notes here once I transcribe them, and that will link you to this page. So when you get that email with the notes, you can leave your comment here, and this is also where the video of this presentation will be. And if you need help finding it, just feel free to email me. I'm Jessica Rohde.
Okay. Well, I hate to cut this off because I think we could go on, and I'm sure there's folks that have more to say on this topic. So please contribute your comment, and we'll carry some part of this discussion on to the next meeting, if that's okay with you, Kent. Kent will be leading the next meeting, and that will be September 10th. And I guess we will take announcements.
I've got one quick one, Kent. Looks like on the 29th of this month, Dr. Sullivan, an NOAA administrator, will be coming up to Fairbanks to get some briefings or discussions on how connected NOAA, National Weather Service, is to the wildfire community in Alaska, and how changes in fire regimes may be occurring related to climate change. And we've got about 2 hours scheduled with her from about 11 o'clock till 1 o'clock here at AFS. So hoping Allison or other folks from Alaska Fire Science Consortium, if somebody or more can join us for that, that would be quite useful.
Yeah, absolutely. I can be there, and we might consider also bringing Sarah Trainer and Tina Buxbaum over, as the ACAP funding, comes from NOAA. So I think we could demonstrate that we're actually quite well integrated. And we might bring Rick Toman over too.
Allison, it would be good to bring the lead for the current NOAA proposal that's going in, research proposal.
Excellent point.
Yes.
That's all I've got.
Okay, now's your chance. Any other announcements?
No, just a great meeting. Thank you. And I'll post my comments in a website link over there where you'll see more information about the airborne system that I was talking about.
Great, thank you. That proposal I just mentioned, I had to pull it up just so I could throw the name out in a drive-by. Yeah, UMABAT, B-H-A-T-T. So some of you may know, it's with the Atmospheric Sciences and Geophysical Institute at UAF is the lead on that. But it's called Seasonal Climate Forecasting Applied to Wildland Fire Management in Alaska and Northwest Canada. Kent, have you heard about this?
Oh, I had not, so this will be interesting to start looking at it.
Yep, yeah, it's a really good proposal, an attempt to make some of the science more relevant to management. So I think you will be interested, and so would the director.
Yeah, good thinking, Randy. Zeke knows quite a bit about it. He's been copied on the email, so he can brief you a little bit, Kent.
Yeah, he did.
Right.
Thanks.
Great.
Okay, final comments, Kent, anything? Shall we wrap this up?
Let's wrap this up. Thank you, everyone. That was a great presentation.
And thanks again to Rachel for preparing that for us. And let's chat on the internet site, on the web, before our next meeting. And we'll develop the agenda based on some of what transpires on that chat. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Jessica.
Thank you.
Thanks. Great job, Rachel.